In the wake of ayahuasca, seeing Joss again, having that intense vision in the bathroom at work, and the earthquake, I plunged into a state of deep emotional alchemy. All these old feelings were coming up, and it felt like I had no control over my emotional state. I was crying nonstop all the time, and it was incredibly intense and exhausting. I felt like all of my energy was spent on trying to seem normal and functioning at work, when in reality, I was simply not. On top of all of this, one of my roommates mentioned to me that she was considering moving out. And as October rolled around, the Harvey Weinstein scandal broke out. I began to realize that this whole Me Too thing was touching on something very deep in the collective karmas, and that it was also connected to everything I had been through with Joss. As the weeks went on, I began to wonder if I would have the wherewithal to make it on my upcoming trip to India, which was set to begin on November 1st. But mostly, all I could think about was the unwitting love triangle I had by some misfortune found myself in. Joss had told me when we were first having dinner that he was seeing someone. And so I, of course, immediately went to stalk her on social media and realized that she was the girl from my dream that I had had right after Age of Ultron came out. To my dismay, she seemed like a very cool and funny and pretty and awesome person, which kind of only made me feel worse. Like I said before, because of all of this, I kept a strong distance and boundaries. And I told Joss that he could reach out again after he did ayahuasca, mostly because I really wanted to know what she was going to show him. I advised him to do 2 ceremonies, just like my astrologer had advised me to do. And they were set for late November, just before I was to return from India. I suspected it would be not fun for him, but I didn't really think that would be a great selling point, so I held my tongue and hoped for the best. Meanwhile, after 2 years of training, I came out of the broom closet as a medium to everyone on my social media pages, and I began offering my services to people on a more official capacity. But by late October, the alchemy was still so intense, and I was still so emotionally fucked up. Part of me still wasn't sure if I was going to be able to make it to India, but my spirit guides assured me that I would be well. And like clockwork, as soon as November 1st rolled around, the day of my departure, the cloud lifted and I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to India today. So the next thing I know, I am in India, and it was a true adventure for me, honestly. I had an amazing trip, and for the first time in so long, I felt totally free and amazing, and I felt like I was learning so much while I was there. While I was on this group trip with a bunch of people, I befriended some of my fellow travelers, and one of them was this wonderful medium and human person in general from the East Coast, and her name is Lauren Rainbow. And to my discovery, she was also a grid worker and had been on sacred journeys all around the world to places like Peru, where she had done ayahuasca as well, and Egypt. Although this trip was her first time to India. I was like, wow, this is exactly what I'm writing about or wanting to write about. And so I was like, tell me everything you know. I want to hear everything. And so she regaled me with some of her sacred travel tales. And she also mentioned that she was going to be leading a sacred journey to Egypt soon. And like I mentioned, I had been wanting really badly to go to Egypt. And so I was like, wow, maybe I'm meant to go with Lauren Rainbow to Egypt, and maybe I can become a grid worker too. A few days before I left India, I started to get a little anxious. I knew that Joss was going to be doing ayahuasca soon, and I was low-key very eager to know how it was going to go. Finally, he emailed me, and he informed me that ayahuasca showed him his own villain origin story, and that it was so intense that he got up and basically ran away a little bit from the shaman. He also mentioned that he saw me in his visions too. He seemed pretty traumatized by the first ceremony and said that he didn't go back for the second one. But at the end of the email, he was like, "Thank you for the worst night of my life." And it seemed like he meant that sincerely. Part of me was a little bummed that he didn't do the second one, but I could understand why, even though we both seemed to understand on some level that what he went through was good for him. On a more macro level, however, I didn't really know what to make of this at all. I had hoped that ayahuasca would tell him about humanity's ascension and that he needed to help me awaken humanity to the true nature of reality through the power of television or something. Like, I don't know really what I expected would happen. But I just was hoping that I'd be able to explain my vision to him. But when I mentioned it to someone on the trip, they were like, it sounds like he shed some layers. So I tried to stay positive about it, even though I had no idea where things were going to go from there. 2 days after I got back from India, I mentioned to my coworker that my roommate was thinking of moving out and that for the first time in almost 5 years, I may need to move soon. I hopped onto PadMapper to tell him how bad the rents for one bedrooms in LA were. And I zoomed into my preferred neighborhood and I clicked on just like the first dot that I saw. And to my surprise, it was a somewhat affordable, like super cute 1-bedroom apartment. And I was like, oh my gosh, wait, I think I need to see this place. And so I called up the people and they were like, yeah, you can just like type in the passcode. You can go by tomorrow morning if you want. And I was like, sweet. So the next morning I went over there and I walked into this apartment. It was in a super small white building and, not very many units. And I walked in and I just knew the moment that I stepped in there that this was my new apartment. So I applied for it on Thanksgiving Day. And within a week, I got approved. I got the apartment. And the next thing I knew, I was moving. And I knew deep down that as soon as I got there, that it was time to finally begin the biggest task of my life, writing the script with a native girl lead. While I was preparing to move in early December, I saw my astrologer again for another reading, and we hadn't spoken much since I had briefly told him about Joss, like that one-liner text that I had sent him back in late August, and he was fascinated by the whole thing. And he noted that Saturn's transit into the sexual chakra of Sagittarius began right around the time I came onto his radar, and he was telling me how he felt it's all connected to the Me Too thing. We spoke about the finer nuances of my situation. At that point, I didn't feel like I could or even wanted to say anything publicly, because even though, yes, there was a power dynamic, yes, it was like an abusive situation on some level, it was also still totally consensual between us. And also, this is such a personal story for me. I just didn't want to be known for any of this. I really wanted to be known for my talent. And so I decided that I was not going to speak out at that point about anything that had happened. At this point, I still hadn't ever explained to my astrologer the whole story of what had happened between me and Joss. So I spent an hour basically taking him through the story, the Cliff's Notes version of the story. By the end of it, I was just like, and the point is, I thought this whole thing was behind me and that I could be over it once and for all. And my astrologer was like, of course not. He was your first love and he's a huge celebrity. And I was like, yeah, well, I did my best to like try and not be around it. And he said, I think it's a great story. Here's what I would tell you to do. Write that. And I was like, maybe one day I'll have a memoir or something once I like do something with my life first. And he was like, you get a job out of college at the biggest fucking comic book company fanboy thing ever. And you end up sleeping with the executive producer behind the showrunners' backs, who are his family that you work for. I mean, really, dude, can we not put our head around just how brilliant that is? Dude, that's the show. And I was like, I know it's a telenovela already. I understand this. But my show has to be about spiritual awakening because I am here to help awaken the masses. And he was like, this will do that. And I was like, I'm not really into the intrigue of my own personal bullshit. I've already lived it once. Why do I want to relive it again? My point being, I thought this whole thing was behind me. And my astrologer was like, it's not all behind you. He's your first love of your life. And do not roll your eyes at me when I say this. He's the first love of your life. Just admit that. And I said, yes, I admit that. And then he was like, great. Now we're somewhere, when before we were nowhere. And I was just like, I was just trying to let it go. And he's like, yes, of course, healing is a part of it. My astrologer then moved on to speak yet again about the Hanuman and Sita element of my chart, and how there's this whole intrigue connected to the Ramayana story and the overthrowing of Lord Ravana, the demon that no one can shake. He said everything is running on this human indecency circuitry right now and all of these things. And I was like, yeah, like how are we having to discuss that pedophiles are bad? Like that's the level that we're at right now. And he's like, yeah, you have to trust that it's building out a landscape and also indoctrinating an army. There are plenty of people who are going to go, fuck that. We have lost our minds. And that's what we're looking for. I said, I've always been obsessed with secrets and conspiracies and things. I feel like so much of what I'm trying to do here is like lift the rug on that in some way. Do you buy into this whole thing that we're in this age of Aquarius right now? And he said, we're in the latter degrees of the age of Pisces. The only people on the age of Aquarius are those who are locked into a high initiate developing path. Those people are really taking it on the chin because you're the first prototypes into the unknown on the Aquarian age. These spiritual masters that are conducting it are pushing the chakra limitations on all these people, and you feel like you're blowing up on re-entry. I'm exhausted, and I have friends who have been doing this work for longer than me who are also exhausted. But I also know people who are on a slippery slope of grandiosity. You do have a big mission, and there's no question about it. But then he advised me to throttle back on the grandiosity a bit because the angst will keep me from showing up and being the passion and being the work. And I was like, yeah, that's true. He said, what I'm here to do is to help you find your balance in all of this. What is the most important story for you to tell right now? And I said, the story of a girl awakening to the true nature of reality. And he said, what is the true nature of reality? And I said, this holographic universe. He's like, okay, how do you depict that? But before I could respond, he grabbed a giant Blavatsky book off his shelf and slammed onto the table in front of me. He then spoke a bit about Blavatsky and how she had written all this stuff about, the nature of the universe and all these different things, and how ultimately it didn't really tilt the world all that much. And I said, I disagree. I think that it had to set the stage for now. And now we'll set the stage for whatever the next thing is. And he's like, exactly, what is that? And I said, I want to set the stage for people to have their own way of dealing with this information. And then he said, you want to make people aware of their relationship with their interior structure, which is the portal to personal happiness. And I was like, yeah, that too. We then spoke a bit about my script and my career. He said that when I'm done with my script, I should send it to Joss because he thinks he's going to be this big ally for me. And admittedly, in my first reading, he did say that older people would help me build out shows and things like that. And at the time, I was like, well, Sam Raimi was attached to executive produce my first pilot, so it did track. I then told him about my vision. And then I was like, so what does this chart say about my husband again? And he said, you have a dynamic husband. You're attracted to powerful, ambitious, aggressive go-getters. He'll be a workaholic, super famous, multi-talented, and much older than you. Sound familiar? And I was just like, yes. As I was integrating this reading, I was like, well, if the script is about a native lead, as I was told to do a year before in the initial download, then what the show really has to be setting the stage for is decolonization, like what Daniel Sheehan was saying and all the indigenous peoples have been saying. But then I realized I had a big problem. I didn't know any native people. Though, to be fair, I hardly knew any people at that point because I had been in such isolation for most of the year with everything going on. However, Within a couple of days of this, a native person on Twitter randomly DM'd me for a reading. And then a friend of mine who didn't know anything about this, we were having brunch, and she randomly invited me to go to a WGA event that was being hosted by the Native American Writers Subcommittee on writing Native American characters. And I was like, wow, this is exactly what I need. I will definitely go to this. And so this was set for late January of 2018, right after I was supposed to do ayahuasca again. I felt like with these two things happening, it was the universe telling me that I was on the right track. Meanwhile, around this time in December 2017, as I was moving, I noticed that there were these articles coming out in like the New York Times and things like that, major mainstream news media publications, about UFOs. And they were coming from this guy, Luis Elizondo, who claimed to have been involved in some sort of UFO watch group and had just quit the Pentagon or whatever. And I found this to be very curious because for the most part in my UFO research years, the mainstream media wouldn't touch this shit with a 10-foot pole. They really have always been very resistant in covering this topic seriously for the most part. And so when I saw this, I found it honestly pretty suspicious. I kind of felt like there was some sort of agenda that was being worked in the very nascent stages. And so I made a note of it because I was reminded about how a year before the Me Too thing happened was all of the Trump like pussy grabbing, whatever, stuff that was coming out right before the election. And I kind of felt like that was a bit of a foreshock to what would later happen at the exact same time the following year with Me Too. And so when I saw this news come out about these UFOs and things, I was like, this feels almost like the same thing. Like this is the seed of some sort of larger thing that is kind of in the process of happening right now. And so I kind of kept it in the back of my mind as something to kind of keep an eye on as time unfolded. As the new year, 2018, rolled around, I was finally getting settled in my new place. And it was soon time to return to ayahuasca. And so I did my usual thing of like, I put on all white, I like got on my futon, I put in my Fiat, I drove downtown, I went to the place, and I participated in, again, 2 ayahuasca ceremonies. Around the time of the first one, the shaman came up to me during the ceremony and he was like, "You have many gifts." And I was like, "Yeah, I do. I think I do have many gifts." And after the ceremony, he invited me to participate in private ceremonies with him. The way I interpreted what he was saying was that because of my gifts, he wanted to like train me to do like shamanic work with this. And I was like, oh, I didn't even realize that you thought I could even do this. Like I was kind of honored that he would think that I had this ability to kind of work with ayahuasca in this way, even though I was like very new to all of it. So I was like, yeah, you know, I'm definitely interested in this. Like I would love to explore this more. And then we got kind of interrupted. And so I was like, well, you know, I'll be back tomorrow and we can like talk about it more. He's like, great. The next day I roll back in for the second ceremony. And in this ceremony, I was taken really deep at a certain point and I was throwing up a lot. And ayahuasca basically was like, she was basically like, you can create your own reality. And it was like all amazing and fun. And then she was like, or you can be sad and mopey, powerless girl. And then I would like vomit and vomit and vomit and vomit. She's like, or you can create your own reality. And it would be like, yay, amazing. And then she's like, or you can be all like sad and mopey powerless girl. And I was like, ugh. And she was toggling back and forth with this like a lot. And I was like, I get it. Like I'm message received. And then I was taken into just this long purging process where I was just like vomiting. And the only words that I kept hearing over and over and over again were responsibility, rainbow, responsibility, rainbow, responsibility, rainbow, responsibility, rainbow. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is this? I was like, the weight of the responsibility that she was really emphasizing was a lot. But at the same time, this notion of this rainbow, it was like she was saying that at the end of all of it, you know, there is this beautiful thing that will come of it. And I was just vomiting so much. The following morning, one of the guys next to me in the ceremony was like, you were throwing up a lot. And I just turned to him and I was like, actually, that means that I was doing this correctly. I mean, I didn't say that, but I was just like, eventually after the ceremony, I went and talked to the shaman again. And he was like, listen, you know, this is very serious business. And with regards to doing the privates with him, and that I have to be ready for it. And I was like, yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like I could be ready to do this work. And he was like, it's basically like a psychic, like sexual surgery. And I was like, wait a minute, what? Sexual surgery? And then I realized he was trying to get me to basically have sex with him on ayahuasca and also have me pay him for the pleasure of doing it. And I was like, wait a minute, what? And he was, I guess, taken aback that I was questioning this at this point. And I said, look, dude, these are some major red flags for me, especially because he had also said before this that he didn't want me to tell my astrologer. And I was like, this is not what I thought you were talking about. And I actually feel very uncomfortable with all of this. And then the shaman looked like he had just, you know, had the rug pulled out from underneath him. Like he didn't think that I had the wherewithal to like counter his narrative. And so I was like, yeah, dude, I'm out of here and I'm not coming back. In the immediate aftermath of this incident of like almost accidentally getting recruited into a creepy sex cult, I had no idea what I was going to do about my astrologer because I knew that he was best friends with this ayahuasca shaman and they went way back. And I felt very conflicted and sad and just like so annoyed that I had yet again found myself in like an abusive situation. And so I just stayed silent for the time being as I integrated, trying to figure out what I was going to do. In the meantime, this WGA Native American Writers Subcommittee event at the WGA came around, and I went to this event, and there was a really great panel, and it was like really great to hear all the different perspectives. And after the panel, I met one of the co-chairs, and I said I had some questions for her, and she gave me her email, and I actually wound up having tacos with her a few weeks later, and we really hit it off. And I told her a bit about what I was working on and like how it's like a medium and all these different things. And she was very supportive, and she gave me some really great advice that helped me kind of figure out the right angle that I wanted to go in with my project. So I felt like that was a great win for me. Meanwhile, around this time in early February of 2018, I was just sitting at work one day when all of a sudden I was overcome with this intense vision of a snake. And it wasn't like the full snake. It was like a super zoomed in, like close up of the body of a snake. And like it was like churning on itself. And I could like feel when it churned and like twisted on itself, I could like feel it all in my body. And the scales of the snake were like red and with like black flakes in them. And it was like a very intense recurring vision that I had multiple times, like this vision of this snake's body and like the churning and like this whole feeling in my body. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what is going on right now? Like I've never had anything like this before happen. And I was just sort of sitting here trying to like pretend that nothing was wrong for my coworker who was like sitting right next to me over on the other side of the room. And I just was like, okay, I'm just going to roll with it and like, see what happens. And as I was refreshing Twitter that day, I saw that John Anthony West had passed away. The author of Serpent in the Sky, the book on the ancient Egyptian archaeology, sacred archaeology that I had read. And chills went down my spine. I was like, oh my gosh, like, what are the odds that I have these intense visions of serpents, like the day that John Anthony West dies? And to this day, I believe that it was a message from the serpents that his work was deeply connected to truth. A little over a week after the visions of the serpents that I had, I was meditating on the night of the eclipse when I was psychically attacked, kind of. It wasn't too horrible, but I was weirded out by it. It was just kind of like this vision of like a weird ghoul, almost like looking like a Grim Reaper kind of thing. And it just kept being very intrusive upon me in my meditation. And eventually I just kind of like gave up. I was like, ugh, whatever, what is this? So weird. And shortly after this, I was texting with my astrologer, and he told me to stay away from the ayahuasca shaman because he had discovered all of this like sexual impropriety and was really upset about it. And I was like, hey, yeah, I should probably tell you what happened. And so I told him, and he was like, oh my gosh, like, why didn't you tell me sooner? And I was like, honestly, dude, like, you guys are best friends, and I just didn't know what to do. And I thought that I would just wait until after the eclipse, and it's after the eclipse now. So now I'm telling you. And he felt really bad. And he mentioned that the shaman had been like coming after him, like astrally. And I was like, oh, it's so weird. I didn't even think to connect it to this. But the other night, on the night of the eclipse, I was psychically attacked. And my astrologer was like, yeah, that was him. He probably thought that you were the one who told me about all of this, but it wasn't you, it was somebody else. And I was like, oh. And I was like, hey, that's annoying. I didn't even say anything. And so he was like, don't worry, I'll take care of him. And he apparently took care of him on the astral plane for me. I mean, I don't know what he did, but I was never bothered again. And I was grateful for this backup, but at the same time, I began to have questions about my astrologer's judgment in people. Meanwhile, I was having a lot more synchronicities and omens and things involving snakes. And finally, in late February, I went to get my weekly blowout, and I was chatting up with a guy who was doing my hair, and he was this like very sweet gay guy, and he was like, oh, you're a medium? You'd really like my partner. He's a voodoo practitioner, and you should totally come over and hang out with us and our 8 snakes. And I was like, 8 snakes? Like, who does this? And I said, And I was like, sure, yeah, like I'll come over. Like I just thought that it would be the right thing to do or whatever. So I said yes. And after I walked out of there, I immediately got my phone and I was like texting my astrologer and I was like, hey dude, what's up with these snakes? And he replied, you're a snake whisperer. And I was like, what is this, Harry Potter now? And he was like, look up Adishesha. So it was at this point that I began looking up information about Adishesha, who is the serpent king of the Nagas, and all about the Nagas and the serpent beings that live under the earth. I did several weeks later wind up going over to my hairdresser's place, and I met his partner, and I hung out with their snakes, and I was like handling them, and they were like slithering all over me, and I was like, this is interesting. And I told this voodoo practitioner that I had just found out that I was a snake whisperer, and he got this like shocked look on his face, and he turned to me and he said, wow, that is really rare. And his partner was like, what's a snake whisperer? And he replied, it's when God speaks through you. Then my hairdresser was like, ever since I brought you up in here, the snakes have been louder than usual. And then I was just sitting there with these snakes. You guys, I was just sitting there with these snakes, and I was just like, meanwhile, throughout all of this, in March and April, I started to get a lot of really excellent momentum on my project, and the writing was finally going really well, and I was showing up every day, and I was like making great progress, and I was also purging a lot emotionally through this time as well, but I was channeling it all into the work, and I was able to get a lot accomplished in terms of outlining the pilot, outlining season 1, getting all these character backstories, like really fleshing out the world, all these different things. And I felt like despite all the craziness that was happening between telepathic snake experiences and like ayahuasca shamans turning evil and all these whatever things that are happening, I was like, for once, I finally feel like things are looking up in some way for me. Unfortunately, this newfound momentum was not to last. And as soon as May rolled around, I began experiencing very bizarre headaches. And in the first week, I thought maybe it was just like stress related. But as time went on, it wasn't going away. And it wasn't just like it was a headache. It was like there was intense pressure behind my eyes. And it would always be worse in one eye, and then it would kind of switch to the other eye, and then it would go back to the other eye. And I just was starting to get very concerned because it was painful and I didn't really know what to do. And over-the-counter pain relievers weren't really helping me. And I'd never had anything like this happen before. And I went to the optometrist thinking it was my glasses, and they were like, oh wow, like your eyes have gotten a lot more fucked up. And I was like, oh no. And so I got new glasses prescription, but then those weren't helping. And so I eventually went to a neuro-ophthalmologist, and they were like, okay, you need to do these eye exercises or whatever for esophoria. And I was just like, okay. So I started doing these eye exercises, but I'm still in a lot of pain. And then finally I text my astrologer and I'm like, hey dude, I'm fucked up right now. What's going on? And he's telling me that there's some just stuff in my chart that's really creating inflammation in the brain for me right now. And that he would recommend seeing his preferred Ayurveda girl, who's a nutritionist and a Ayurveda body worker named Katie, and that she could maybe help me out. So I get into contact with this girl, Katie, and she came over to my house, my apartment, and she gave me this really intense Marma treatment, which is kind of an acupressure, but it's really, really she's very strong fingers. So it's like, it's not necessarily like a massage, but it's just kind of like pushing all these points all over my body. But then afterwards you feel like really amazing. And so she gave me this treatment, and then she was giving me all this nutritional advice about like drinking cooling drinks to like reduce the inflammation, like coconut water and things like that. But she was like, you know what? I know the person who can really help you. And she referred me to this healer. And I was like, thank you so much. Like, I will definitely reach out to this healer because I'm desperate as fuck right now. So I reached out to this healer, and I set an appointment for June. In the midst of all of this, I was feeling really confused about what was happening with the whole Joss situation. And I did my best to like kind of just stay out. Like, we hadn't spoken really since November. I was really keeping my distance. I was like, look, dude, you know, you do you. I'm kind of working on my own self right now, and maybe we can like get into contact later or something like that. It wasn't like bad. We were amicable. It's just that we weren't like really talking. And I made a point not to. And, but I was still really curious as to like what was going on, obviously. So one day in early June, I'm not proud, but I went and stalked his girlfriend on Instagram. And to my surprise, the most recent post that she had made was of a snake that had broke into her dad's house. And I was like, oh, like, I think this was a sign for me. Like, I was like, oh gosh, like, I feel guilty now. Like, I logged off. I was like, this is maybe not the best thing that I should have been doing. But at the same time, I was like, I kind of think that they could be over soon for some reason. Shortly after this, I finally got to see the healer. And in the first session with her, she looked at me and she was like, were you in a car accident? And I was like, yeah, like 3 years ago, I was in this car accident. Like, I was T-boned. And she was like, I thought that I was okay though. Like, I went to urgent care and they're like, no, they wouldn't even be able to see this. Like, I'm trained in seeing things that are very subtle in nature. And I was like, oh. And she basically explained to me that I had some like kind of weird whiplash torque in my like structure. And then I laid down and she did some like light body work on me. And when she got to my head, she was like, oh yeah, you have like a lot of like unprocessed kundalini in here. And I was like, yeah, you know, I had this kundalini awakening and it like really fried my nervous system. And she's like, yeah, between this and the kind of residual effects from your accident, it's like there was just a lot of like energetic kind of traffic jam happening that was like triggered all of a sudden and was causing all of this pain in my head and eyes. And so after this first session with her, the pressure behind my eyes was gone. And then after my second session with her, all the pain was gone. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, no wonder all these doctors couldn't help me. Like, yet again, this was a spiritual sickness. And I was very like, I mean, by that point I had been in constant pain for 6 weeks and I was really struggling. And so by the time I got this cure, I was like, oh my gosh, like, given how sensitive my whole system is, I think I need to be seeing this person monthly. And so I started to see her on a monthly basis. Also, in the midst of all of this, I began to realize that I wanted to resume studying UFOs. I had kind of stopped studying UFOs like on a like obsessive basis in late college when I kind of shifted my energies to my assistant career. But given what I suspected was on the horizon with regards to these UFOs, I decided that I kind of need to brush up on my knowledge. So I was led to watch this dude's YouTube channel, Dark Journalist. And I found him to have some really interesting things to say. This guy does the reading. And I I may not agree with him all the time on politics stuff. I definitely have some differences of opinion on certain matters, but I also felt like he was correct in terms of these recent disclosures of the government and how a lot of this just kind of feels very suspect. And so I continued to kind of pay attention to this dark journalist. Also because he would have Gigi Young on, and I had been following Gigi Young's work for a while. And the fact that he was, very much able to navigate these esoteric spaces as just as much as the kind of more grounded, political, government kind of more, military stuff that was, maybe more like the usual thing that you would look into, was pretty impressive to me. And so I kind of kept tabs on that whole situation as well. As July 2018 rolled around, I was maybe 5 days pain-free from my second session with the healer when I decided that, you know what, I've been really alone this whole year. I've been really struggling, not having a ton of friends, and I really want to get out there and meet more spiritual people, spiritual friends. And so I saw that there was going to be this cacao ceremony on Instagram that someone was promoting. And I was like, oh, I haven't never done cacao in a ceremonial setting. I think that would be really cool to do. And maybe I could meet some other light worker type friends there. So I signed up to go. And what I didn't super think through was the fact that it was also the night of an eclipse. And I, for whatever reason, was just like, oh, this is a spiritual activity, so I should be fine. Anyway, I get to this cacao ceremony, and we each get a little cup of cacao. And I went to drink this cacao, and there was something very sharp inside of this cacao, accidentally, obviously. And to this day, I don't even know what it was. But before I realized what was happening, I had swallowed this very sharp object. And it essentially ripped a very intense gash all down my throat, all down through my sternum, basically to the center of my chest, right here, on the inside, obviously. And it was incredibly painful. In the moment, I thought oh shit, this is not great. But I I didn't cry or anything. I just kind of was I will just handle this, I guess, when I leave. I just kind of left and didn't say anything to these people about what had happened. But in the days afterwards, I was like, oh man, I have really severely injured my entire esophagus. It was incredibly painful. And I basically had to go on a diet of soft foods only, and not eating certain, there were very few things I could really eat for a while. And I felt like it was very easily re-traumatized. And it was definitely it was a very challenging time, because at the same time that I had this injury, I found out that OKKO got canceled by Cartoon Network, and that I was about to lose my job in September. And so I was I kind of was beginning to feel that it was that feeling of everything that could go wrong was starting to go wrong. And I was oh no, clearly this throat injury that I just had was like a karmic event, and like I'm convinced it was some, past life kind of payout from some stuff that happened in Atlantis. And so I was like, well, I've taken this hit. I can't do anything about it other than just hope that it will heal over time. While this is going on, while I found out that my job was going to be toast, I saw this announcement that Joss was going to have a new show on HBO called The Nevers. And I was like, wait, what? Like, part of me was so confused. I was like, if Joss is supposed to help me with my show and I'm supposed to be having my show happen when I'm 31 in 2021, how does this timeline work at all? Because it's 2018 now. By the time the show comes out, it'll be 2021. But presumably, he will be working on the show still because there's usually going to be more than one season. So I was kind of just like starting to wonder what was even happening at this point on all fronts. But then when I told my astrologer about this, he was like, well, why don't you just ask for a job? Like, you're losing your job at the exact same time this is happening. And I was like, I don't know if I want to ask Joss for a job. Like, ugh. But he was like, I would consider it. And I was like, okay, fine. So I emailed Joss for the first time in like almost a year at this point. And I was like, hey, I saw the news about your show and I was wondering if you were hiring writers. And he got back to me and he was like, hey, I'm sorry to say that we are not hiring staff writer level. And I was like, I don't think so. So I sent him my script and I was like, please consider me. Because I had seen that the show was about, women with superpowers. And I was like, you know what? There should be representation on this show of women with superpowers. And as a woman with superpowers, I kind of feel like I could be that person. But then after this, I didn't hear back at all. In the midst of all of this as well, I noticed that there was another show announcement, and it was for this show, Project Blue Book, based on the government UFO research project that happened, decades ago. And I, yet again, was like, interesting. A UFO show being announced during eclipse season. There is definitely something brewing with this that is happening, and I will be keeping tabs on this because it just seems like very, like it's going to become very important later. However, my main priority was my now desperate attempt to fix any area of my life, because it felt like things were just falling apart left and right. Like my health, my job, the whole Joss situation was a question mark. So I decided that after all of this, it was finally time for me to get initiated into Kriya Yoga. And so I got in touch with my astrologer, and he was like, hey, so my guru is coming to town, and you could just attend the satsang, and then if you wanted to get initiated into Kriya Yoga the following day with him, you can do that. And I was like, okay, normally I wouldn't be into a whole guru thing, but it is my astrologer's guru, and doesn't mean that I have to have him be my guru. It's just that like at least it's this setup where I'll be able to like learn Kriya Yoga and like get a transmission and then be able to just bounce from there. So I decided to go through with this, and again, I was like in a very desperate state. I like really was like, I needed to do anything to like relieve the karmic pressure on me, because again, I was in a lot of severe pain from this throat injury, and I was panicking about my financial situation, because I didn't have a ton in savings, and I had gotten in a pretty bad fight with my dad on the day of the eclipse when I told him that I was losing my job. So I went to the Pasadena Masonic Lodge and I took the transmission, and the following day I got the Kriya, and I started to do it. And around this time, I also decided that I should go to Mount Shasta on a retreat with this guru and some of his other, people who were in this circle, and my astrologer was going to be there. And I thought to myself, well, I haven't been anywhere since India, and I don't really have the money to go anywhere else. And I've always wanted to go to Shasta because it's like a power place. It's like the root chakra of the earth. And so this sounds like a great kind of 2-for-1 with this guru or whatever. And so in late August, I traveled to Mount Shasta. So I flew to Sacramento, and then I rented a car. And before I even could get onto the highway to drive to Shasta, I got a flat tire. And so I had to turn around and go to a Jiffy Lube and sit around waiting for 3 hours to get a replacement tire and all this stupid crap. Finally, I get on the road to drive to Mount Shasta, and as I'm driving in to the mountain, it starts to get really dark and gray, and then I start to smell the smoke, and then I get out in McLeod and where I was staying, and it is literally raining ash. It is there's fires surrounding us everywhere, and I'm oh no, did I just come all the way up here only to have to evacuate because of these forest fires? And so I go into the hotel and I check in and I change into my all white clothes or whatever. And I go down to the chapel thing that we were having our first kind of satsang meeting in that evening. And they were yeah, just keep your bag packed by the door just in case. And I was oh my gosh. And then my astrologer though popped up and he was don't worry, my guru will make sure that the fires don't come over here. And I'm he can do that? So I was okay, I guess I'll just hope for the best. So this weekend at Shasta, man, I mean, for one thing, this guru was transmitting Shaktipat the entire time. And on the plus side, my throat was completely fine for the entire weekend. It felt like it was basically normal and uninjured. On the other hand, when you are being constantly flooded with Shaktipat 24/7, you sort of feel like you're on drugs a little bit. It was there was a lot being processed throughout that whole weekend with everybody. And I just remember the first satsang night, I was listening to him give his transmission. I don't even remember what he was talking about. And then there was a Q&A session or whatever. And I had read his book on Babaji in the lead up to all of this. And I think I read his other book too. And I, yet again, just like the Ananda place and also SRF, I was there's a lack of the divine feminine presence in all of this. I'm really wanting to know what's up with that. So I decide I'm going to ask this guru at this satsang this question. So I walk up to him and I'm hey, can you tell me why there's this imbalance of the lack of the divine feminine presence in all of this? And I was referencing some stuff in the book and all this whatever stuff. And I felt like his answer was not really an answer. Like, I don't even remember what he said, but I just kind of was like, this is not really answering my question. And then later, it was the next day, and we were having I want to say it was like a lunch as a group. And the guru invited all of the new people who had just been initiated into Kriya, like when he was in California, to join him at his table to ask questions or, have like a group lunch or whatever. And so I sat at this table with the other people who were new, with this guru. And this guru went on to say that he didn't have to be anyone's guru who was there, and that he invited people to read into his energy and see if he was a good fit for them or that he was legit. And so, of course, me, having trained as a psychic medium and being interested in scoping it out, the situation, I decided that I was going to do that right then and there. So I started to expand my energy field to go towards his energy field to read it. And as soon as I made contact with his energy field, it was like the gates of Fort Knox had suddenly just went like wham. And I was prevented from seeing anything. And instantly after this, he looked at me and he said, "See, she didn't see anything." And that was a red flag for me, obviously. I was like, okay, there's something wrong happening here. But at the same time, I was also still so kind of emotionally all over the place at this time, and there was all this Shakti pop being constantly pumped everywhere. I was just kind of like, yeah, I just need to integrate everything that's happening right now. And so I didn't say anything about this to my astrologer. And then later in this weekend, it was said that the guru and some other people who he was with in a smaller faction, they were out meditating on the mountain and they saw Babaji and appear. And I to this day don't know if that actually happened or not because I didn't see it. But my astrologer seemed to believe that this had happened, even though he also wasn't there. But he seemed to be like, this is a major weekend because Babaji doesn't just pop up like that normally. He is a very elusive, high level, avatar level being, apparently. So that was kind of an interesting moment also that happened that weekend. But overall, I kind of felt like there were cult vibes, and that while I was going to do this Kriya, I wasn't sure if I really fit in with these people. Shortly after my return from Mount Shasta, I had about a month of my job left, and I was sitting at work one day when I got an email back from Joss, and I was surprised to hear from him because I thought that, nothing had happened with my email that I had sent. I just didn't expect that I would hear from him at all. But he got back to me, and he had actually a very good excuse as to why he didn't email me back right away. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's like totally fine. Like I totally am, like, it's not a problem at all. And he was like, listen, I read your script, and while it's not a great fit for the Nevers, you could be pretty good for this Buffy reboot thing that had also been announced. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, you know, that's better than nothing at all. So I was grateful for that, and that he had read it and everything. At the same time, you know, the Buffy reboot was like not really, the groundwork wasn't really laid fully on that. It was kind of like a question mark still as to when it would even happen, if it would even happen. So I kind of felt like I couldn't really put any weight in that happening. And so after all of this, and as my job wound down, I was like, okay, I just have to go back and invest in myself and get back to work on my script, because I had gotten so like waylaid by all of my health issues in the summer that it had kind of been languishing for many months without me having done any work on it. At the end of September, right at the beginning of October 1st, I grabbed dinner with Joss, and it was the first time we had seen each other in like a year, basically, since we had last hung out at the beach the day of the vision. And I had a nice dinner with him, and we caught up, and I found out that he was single. But he also didn't seem to want to start anything serious with anyone at the time. So again, I just decided that, okay, I'm going to focus on my work, and I'm going to power through and get a draft out of the script like as soon as possible. I spent the next several weeks hardcore writing nonstop, and I managed to get a draft out of the pilot of my script finally, after almost 2 years since getting the instructions from the universe. I had a draft, and so I decided that I was going to send it to my astrologer to get notes from him, since he's also a writer, and since I didn't really have anyone else to send it to. And while I was waiting to hear back from him, I had been doing Kriya Yoga, like not as religiously as I probably should have been doing it, but I was still doing it pretty decent amount. And I began to notice things beginning to surface that were very uncomfortable for me, in terms of like the karmas that I was sensing kind of being cleared away. And I was seeing it mostly in dreams. And it wasn't like a hugely oppressive presence of stuff, but it was enough to kind of make me feel a bit uncomfortable. And they were things that were connected to my ancestry. And I tried to kind of brush it aside, but I was definitely kind of creeped out. Meanwhile, my astrologer got back to me with notes from my script, and it was actually more like a phone call of him saying that he only got like 14 pages in before he stopped reading it. And it was really harsh, actually. He gave me really, really harsh criticism on my draft. Ultimately, his note was that it was structural, and that I should have started the script where I ended it in my version that I had. He wasn't wrong, but I was very hurt by his delivery, and the level of harshness that he displayed to me was honestly the last thing I needed after the shit show of a year that I had had. And I fell into a very dark depression, and I kind of felt like the entire year yet again had been a total waste. On top of all of this, I knew that my natal Jupiter was about to get eclipsed with the upcoming eclipse cycles, and I slowly around this time began to wonder if my astrologer would make it through the transit, because he plays a Jupiter role in my life. And I was feeling very similarly about his guru. Between the ayahuasca shaman turning evil and my suspicion of his guru and him being so harsh with me needlessly in this moment when I was feeling vulnerable and when I just needed to have, like, you know, kind advice given to me as opposed to, like, you know, just that overly harsh advice. It was just, I basically spiraled, and I basically spent all of November strung out on my couch, smoking weed, watching conspiracy documentaries and like Twin Peaks and like eating Indian food and just like crying and like wanting to not be alive. Like I really just felt like I couldn't catch a break. And I remember like this is when the Malibu fires were happening, and it was so intense energetically in LA with all of the fires, and it felt like I was being like burned inside. Like it just felt like I was just going through a massive like ego death throughout all of this, and it was really, really difficult to deal with. And on top of this, like my throat was still not back to normal, and I began to kind of realize that I was probably going to be having long-term effects from my throat injury. And honestly, to this day, I still struggle with scar tissue and injuries to the fascia in the lower portion of my sternum. By early December, I had slowly started to like put the pieces back together, and I went to see my astrologer for a postmortem, and he told me to not be too hard on myself, that I navigated the pressure the best that I could, and that most people wouldn't have been able to navigate the pressure of the past year as well as I did. And he told me again to remember that I have this Hanuman and Sita and Ravana conversation in my chart, and that I do the impossible again and again and again in my life. And I was like, yeah, like I know I have this track record, but like every time I get to that breaking point before the impossible happens, I forget that I've done it before. And he said, you just need to lean into the doing of it instead of being in the Erin shade of it. You have to get into the vehicular doing of it and be the cog run by consciousness. Hanuman goes to Sita in the garden and tells Rama that he is coming to get her. And Hanuman is so wrecked with upset about her state because she's Lakshmi embodied. So you can imagine how beautiful she is and how sad she is and how imprisoned she is by this incredible demon, that he sets everything on fire as he leaves Sri Lanka. Then he was like, K2 is cleaning house right now, and your script was constipated because you are constipated. But I wouldn't expect anyone with a chart like this to not be constipated. There is a grip happening that is almost pre-hemorrhoidal. And I was like, ugh. And then he was like, your ambition is being held back by Shiva himself, saying, no, no, little snake. Ambition is Vasuki, the Naga, wrapped around Shiva's throat. His hood is up. He's ready to strike, but he's also in a trance. But he's not going to strike because Shiva is in this meditative state, and it's blissing the snake out too. And the snake is sitting there in anticipation of the unknown. It's having a relationship with the unknown. This is literally the reptilian cortex mind engaging with the unknown. God's business is the past, and God's business is the future. And all you've got is right now. And it's the suspended state of meditation. So you have to edit everything out of your life that isn't existing in a charmed yet relaxed, striking pose. It can strike at opportunity on the basis of getting comfortable existing inside of the unknown. Mars in Rahu has the potential for detoxing huge, heavy toxins out of your system. It's sitting on one of the entry points for Vishnu, on the wheel. Do you know the story of Vaman the dwarf? And I was like, no. And he goes on to tell me the story about Vaman the dwarf, who was Vishnu's sixth incarnation. Bali, an extraordinary demon, had amassed monster pieces of power. All of heaven had been disseminated, and the gods had been cast out. Bali was in the process of installing deities from the Rakshasa demonic class into heaven. So Indra and all of the gods went to Vishnu and were like, fucking shut this down. And Vishnu's like, fine, I'll handle it. So he incarnates as this little Brahmin dwarf, and he enters the throne room of Bali. And Bali is incredibly taken by him right away. He knows there is something special about this Brahmin dwarf. And the dwarf entertains him with his intelligence of the Vedas. And Bali says, I will give you anything you want in my kingdom that you ask for. And Shukracharya, who is Venus, is sitting right there. And Shukracharya knows exactly who this Brahmin dwarf is. And Shukracharya's allegiance is to the Rakshasas because his job is to get them enlightened as quickly as possible. And Bali was a benevolent Rakshasa, so it was in their best interest to stay in power and let Bali do his thing. And so he says, Lord, don't you understand who you're talking to? And Bali says, hush, hush, I'm talking to this dwarf, not you. And Shukracharya is like, no, you are in tremendous danger. And Bali shoves Shukracharya into a teapot. And he tries to get out, and Bali gets annoyed and pokes out one of Shukracharya's eyes. And so Shukracharya only has one eye, which represents that desire only sees the thing it's focused on, because Venus rules desire. They continue their discourse, and Bali is still incredibly taken by the wisdom of Vaman, this dwarf. And he says, I will give you anything you ask for in my kingdom. And Vaman says, I'm a Brahmin. I have no needs. The Vedas are my home and my soul. And Bali says, no, please take something. I have gold, women. And Vaman says, okay, I will take 3 steps of your kingdom. Wherever I can step, I will take that part of your kingdom and call that mine. And Bali laughs and says, no, take a bigger thing. And Vaman says, no, this is good. I'll take these 3 steps. So Bali says, fine, fair enough. And instantly he knew he was fucked, because Vaman began to grow to Vishnu's size. And he takes his first step and he encompasses all of the earth. And Vaman takes the second step and takes all of heaven. And now Vishnu looks down at Bali and asks, and where shall I place my 3rd step? And Bali says, on my head, Lord, on my head. And the story goes that Vishnu placed his 3rd step on his head and pushed him into another dimension, where he waits to become an Indra and the Vishnu for another world cycle. And then I said, oh wow, so that's a long time. And he was like, yes, but this is karma seeded accordingly. And all of this is in the story of your chart. He then went on to say, the Capricorn circuit is excretory by nature, which is editing and detoxing. Anytime Rahu and Ketu are placed here, the individual shows up to speed the karma in the environment that she is around and in. And so you will speed up the karma by nature of interfacing with whatever activity or social community or environment that you are in. And I was like, yeah, actually, one other person had told me that I have a very activating field. And he was like, yes, it activates along these lines to get the most passion squeezed out, the most inflammation squeezed out, the most drama squeezed out. Look at Joss. Joss is the perfect example. Joss went through bloody fucking hell for this affair he had with you inside his own mind. Like tormented, tortured, blah, blah, blah. All of his demons come up to purge. He goes on to the ayahuasca, goes like, sees himself as a super villain, the whole big crazy shit. This is what a very fast gesture purge looks like. And I was like, oh, oops. And he was like, listen, I don't know how you're going to unstick the constipation without committing to 2 to 4 years of hardcore sadhana, like really showing up for it. But the good news is you've technically got the time to do it. This whole chart hinges on maturity. But that doesn't mean that you have to wait 30 to 40 years to have the life that you want. What it means is that you can push the maturation process if you accept what's involved in the maturation process, which is hardcore truth-telling, discipline, education, passion for education, and the truth, editing, 4 pieces of editing in the excretory system. We need to be more about getting rid of shit than holding on to shit. Then he goes on to say, you were at the top of Mount Shasta with Guru Nath when Babaji himself made an appearance. That doesn't make your karma very light. It's pretty big and brilliant. And I was like, yeah, I have some paranoia about what I suspect is on the horizon. And he was like, on the horizon for the human race, or I was like, for myself, for the human race in general, kind of everything. And I was like, so much of it has to do with all of that research I did into conspiracies and things when I was younger. And I then told him about how I had been obsessed with UFOs and like the X technology and how people thought I was crazy. And my astrologer said that the government having the X technology was an unverifiable fact. But I was like, I don't know, dude. I kind of feel like I'm about to be involved in like an international UFO like conspiracy. And he just chalked it up to my wild imagination. And then he was like, look, we need to get into the zone of loss. And I was like, I kind of feel like I've been in that zone. He's like, no, you've been in the zone of fighting loss, resisting loss. I would expect both work and career to seize up if you are in any way resistant to the process that Saturn is engaged in accordingly. You need these educations so that you can refine yourself into these higher states of alchemical processing and transforming. We need to get the Kriya online. And I was like, I'm doing 72 Kriyas per day. And he's like, good. Get to 108 and then 144. You have a year to refine the alchemy of your intellect. And then as we had this whole long conversation and it was winding down, he took one last look at my chart and he was like, it's funny. The more I look at the chart, the more I'm like, when is Josh just going to fucking get it? And I'm like, yeah, I've been thinking that for the past year. Thanks. And he said, you're going to have to get it first. As I left my reading with the astrologer, he gave me 2 very simple remedies to work with going forward. Socialize and get curious about other people's desires. In the spirit of this and embracing the unknown as the serpent ready to strike, I decided that I was going to start talking to Joss again over text. And so towards the end of the month, like over the holidays, we were texting again and one thing led to another and we decided that we were going to go on a date. And, you know, I, at this point, I was very tired of living the nun life. I hadn't had sex since I last slept with him in London in May of 2014. And I also felt like he was really working on himself. And I thought that maybe if I could just let go and be vulnerable, that this could maybe go somewhere this time. Part of me felt like I was trying to like reverse engineer this vision that I had. Like I had been shown what the end result was, but not how to get there or when it was going to happen. And I was like, maybe this is the way. Maybe if we date, I can over time explain to him that we live in a hologram and that I have this destiny to help awaken humanity to the true nature of reality through the power of television, and that he is meant to help me. So with this master plan in mind, I show up for our second first date, I guess, the first weekend of January 2019. And it was at a hotel with like a fancy restaurant. And I remember before I got there, I was getting ready and I like put on this red dress and I was thinking to myself like, wow, it's been so long since I've like gotten dressed up and like gone out and like done something, you know, like I had just felt up until that point that my life had been so like hijacked by everything that I had been going through with this spirituality stuff that I wasn't even like human anymore. I was just kind of like barely existing. And so like when I got there, I was like, wow, I actually like get to be a person for once. And it's funny, I actually didn't expect to get emotional at this part. But I got there, and when I got to his room, we kissed, and then we smoked some weed, and we went to go have dinner at the restaurant, and it was like this amazing dinner. And then we came back to his room, and we had an amazing night. And I remember at one point we were talking, and he was saying to me like that he had just realized recently that the things that he writes about like later are relevant, like they come true, kind of, is what he was saying. And I just sat there and I was like, The next morning he said he wanted to see me again, and I was so happy. Honestly, I was like, wow, I think this getting curious about other people's desires and embracing the unknown is really working for me. Like I was just so again, it just felt like I was able to finally be a person again and not be so besieged by all of these like spiritual initiations and like crazy things that were happening. But then almost immediately after this, I got really sick with a bad cold, and like I couldn't even speak. My throat was like so messed up, and I was stuffed up. It was just like my entire whole everything was just fucked. And I hadn't been sick like that in years. And I knew partly it was because I was stressed out, but I also kind of suspected that it was because Joss's vibration was still like kind of low. No offense to him. I think that it was partially due to like a vibrational discrepancy, if only because I had been doing so many spiritual practices over the past year. I kind of forgot to mention this earlier, but like throughout that whole summer that I was like struggling with my health, I was doing like nonstop mantra remedies for Mars, and then I did the Rahu 64,000 chants of Rahu times 3 in a row over the course of like 12 weeks. So it was like really, I had really been going to town on myself energetically. And so I think that opening myself up in that way, maybe like I let myself be susceptible to something. I don't know. But I knew we were going to have another date. And so I was like, fuck, I have to like get over this cold so fast. So I spent the entire week slamming herbal remedies and like drinking gallons of water and just like doing everything humanly possible to get rid of this terrible cold I was having. Finally, the date of our second date, or second date, whatever, arrived, and we went to dinner out, and then we came back to his house. And he was living in a different house from before, so he gave me a tour, and he was showing me all of his artwork that he has been collecting. And then we smoked some weed, and he told me a little bit about the Nevers. And he was like, yeah, you know, her name is Amalia True, and she can see the future, and she has a mission. And I was like, yeah, same. You know, I told him that I was a medium, obviously, like the year before. But I don't really know if he ever like believed me or like really got it like at all. I don't know what his whole cosmology was. Like, he still seemed to be pretty atheist. But I do my best to put all of my trying to reverse engineer my vision kind of stuff in the back of my mind so that I could like just be in the now, like my astrologer said, and enjoy a nice night. And when we went up to his bedroom, he began gushing about this painting above his bed. And it was this huge painting of a woman swimming in water. And I was like, yeah, that is a nice painting. And we slept under that painting that night. The next morning, he told me that he wasn't seeing anyone else. And I got excited, and I wondered when we would get to go on another date. And I felt myself beginning to emerge from the horrible depression / shit show that was my 2018. And I thought maybe I can begin to rework my script, and I can just like get my life back on track to where I need it to be. Meanwhile, at the very beginning of February 2019, I was led to get a reading from this Mayan calendar reader named Raymond Tarpey. And he channels messages from a crystal skull that he was given guardianship of, named Earthkeeper. Yes, this is the portion of the story where the crystal skulls enter into the picture. And he was telling me all sorts of interesting things, like how we aren't speaking English, we are speaking German. And I was like, wow, man, that really, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but that totally shifts my perspective around how deeply I'm colonized internally, considering that English is like not the actual indigenous language of the Celtic Isles. Then he went on to talk about how I have had multiple past lives in Peru as a shaman. And I was like, yes, I have intuited that, and other people have mentioned this to me in the past, and ayahuasca alluded to it. And he said that he had an overwhelmingly strong feeling that I needed to go on a sacred journey to Peru. And he recommended that I travel with a man named Jorge Luis Delgado. And as it so happens, I remembered in that moment that I saw Lauren Rainbow, who was the grid worker who I met in India in 2017 with Fleur. She had just announced on her social media that she was going to be leading or co-leading a sacred journey to Peru in November of 2019, like that same year. And when I saw it, I thought it sounded really cool. And she says that she hasn't been since 2004. So it was like exciting for her as well. But I remember being like, oh, well, I don't have a job and my finances are really fucked right now, and I don't really know what's going to happen. So I feel like it's just not really in the cards for me. But when Raymond Tarpey told me about this, I was like, maybe I should look at Lauren's trip. So I went to go look at the details of her trip, and lo and behold, who is her local Peruvian guide but none other than Jorge Luis Delgado. And I'm like, I have got to go to Peru. Like, this is clearly something that I am being orchestrated to participate in. Unfortunately, shortly after this, I suddenly and very seriously plunged into what remains one of the absolute darkest initiations of my entire life. The Kriya that I was doing was bringing up horrible things in my dreams that haunted me, and they were these ancestral karmas that were coming up for clearing. But the experience of clearing them was very visceral and very deep and incredibly painful. And the whole thing left me basically bedridden. I was crying all the time. I was in so much psychic pain. I had cystic acne, like basically erupt all over my face. And I was like actively wishing for my own death. Like it was really, really gnarly. And I just felt like I was covered in shit all the time. And when I went to see my healer during this time, I spent the entire session sobbing, from the pain. It was all stuff that like was being epigenetically like surfacing and like released through my body through purging, through crying, through like dry heaving, through all these different things. But it felt like it belonged to me. Even though I knew it didn't belong to me, it felt like it belonged to me. And it was really treacherous. And I was screaming into a pillow one day during this time. I was in so much pain when Joss texted me. And I hadn't heard from him in weeks, and I was kind of confused because I thought that we were going to go on another date, and I was like really wondering what was going on. And he texted me, and he said that he had this kind of vision of me recently, and I was like, look, dude, I'm in a really deep shamanic initiation right now. Like, I don't know what to tell you. And I knew he didn't really know what that was, but I just didn't really have the energy to like try and explain it any other way. It's just hard to describe to people. Even now, I find it hard to describe this situation because it's, again, it was so energetic, and it was so it was so internal, and it was so involving a lot of things that I kind of don't even really want to talk about in the video. Yeah, after this, we had like a nice little chat, but after this, we lost contact and we didn't speak again for a while. And I didn't want to come across as clingy or anything, so I think I was maybe keeping it a little too cool. But at the same time, it's like he wasn't really putting in like the effort that I would suspect a person would put in if they really wanted to like see a person. So I was feeling so awful anyway, so I didn't really push it. And I just kind of chalked it up to him being really busy with like the Nevers stuff, and like he was about to move to London soon, and I was like, oh, time is a flat circle, like here we go again, like I just can't deal with this right now. And I eventually had to go visit family in Breckenridge, Colorado, and upon my return, my mother came to town, and the entire time that she was in town, I bled from my womb the entire duration of her visit. And I was not on my period at the time. And that was I had never experienced that before in my life. And when I told my healer about it, she told me that women can sometimes grieve from their wombs. And I knew that it was all a part of this like deep ancestral clearing that I was experiencing, like on all levels. And it was just so incredibly intense. To this day, February 2019 remains one of the absolute worst months of my entire life. It was really bad. In the aftermath of all of this, I was still nowhere with my script, and my finances were going south very fast, especially because I was spending money on this trip to Peru that I didn't really actually have. And I began to wonder if I was even going to be able to stay in LA. But I decided to stick it out another month, and April rolled around. And April was a very weird month. For one thing, I had recurring visions in my meditations for the past few months before this of a tower in Paris burning. And I was like, so weird. And I kind of just chalked it up to, again, my imagination, until I saw the fire broke out at Notre Dame. And when I saw the spire on top of the cathedral in flames and collapse, I realized that was actually what I was seeing in my vision, was the spire. So I thought that was pretty potent as a omen for how the rise of the divine feminine energy is disintegrating patriarchy, basically, because it was only the spire, like the phallic part of the church, that was severely damaged, whereas like the body of the church, like the dom, remained relatively intact. Then around this time also, a homeless person who was probably drunk, I don't really know, tried to break through my bedroom window, and I had to call the cops. And then the following day, I went to go meet with my astrologer at his place, and he was going to help me re-break my outline for my script. And I was very grateful for his help. And we were sitting out in his little courtyard in his apartment complex. And after a good day's work, I left and I thanked my astrologer profusely. And the next day after this, I was sitting in meditation, and I was thinking, my astrologer's helped me so much outside of the readings that I've gotten from him, like for free. And I really would love to just give back. And so I got the idea when I was sitting in meditation to see if he would want to receive some Reiki. So I texted him and I was like, hey, would you want to receive some Reiki? And he was like, actually, yes, I am feeling incredibly sick right now. And I was like, oh my gosh, I will do it right now. And so I scanned his chakras intuitively, and I sent him Reiki, and then I wrote down everything that were my impressions from each of his chakras, and I texted everything I got to him, like long paragraphs of just like whatever I was getting for each chakra, which is like what I do when I give Reiki sessions to clients. And my astrologer had never gotten a reading from me or knew much about my abilities. Like, he obviously knew from my chart that I was highly Gnostic, but when I told him that I had trained as a medium, he had kind of dismissed it. And I was like, but you can't dismiss this. Like, I've been doing this for like 2 years now, or 3 years. And so actually by that point it was almost 4 years. So I was pretty solid in my intuitive ability by this point, and he responded to my text and he was like, wow, that is so accurate. Like, you are really good at this. And I'm like, thanks. And he's like, do you think I need to go to urgent care? And I was like, honestly, dude, if you think you need to go to urgent care, like, you should go. So he decides to go. And I get a text from him later of him outside of urgent care, and a snake has crossed his path, and he sent me the photo of it, and I was like, oh gosh, here we go. Initiation season. And so anyway, he winds up getting admitted to Cedars, and I was like, astrologer, I'm so concerned for you. Like, what is going on? And he's like, they keep running tests and they don't know yet, and I'm on all these drugs and everything. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And finally I was like pestering him. I was like, you can't be there alone by yourself. Like, let me come visit you. So I went to go visit him in the hospital and spent some time, you know, chatting and just like trying to get his mind off of the stuff. And he was really sick, and I was really worried. And you have to understand, like, despite our differences, like, I really deeply loved my astrologer, and I felt like he was the closest thing I ever had to, like, I don't know, an uncle or something, like, you know, like a close family member who like really knew me in this way, unlike most of my family at the time. And so I was really, really worried about him. And I later, like 5 days later, he texted me that he had been released, but he didn't say what had happened. All the while this was happening, my new friend Katie and I were getting closer and closer. She was the Ayurveda body worker who had helped me the previous year with my whole health stuff. And we were talking on the phone all the time and trading stories about our lives. And it was just a nice change of pace to like have someone to talk to who was my age and on the path in like kind of a similar way and was into, you know, all the spirituality and stuff. And I told her about all the dreams I was having about what I was clearing on the astral plane, because around this time, like during this year, I just began to experience more and more dreams of a karmic clearing nature. And so I was actually doing a lot of spiritual work when I was asleep at night. And I remember I told her about this one dream where I was at the King of Prussia Mall in the Philadelphia area, and I went to go into a store, and I was like, it was kind of like a Kate Spade kind of store, like for like bougie white women or something like that. And I went towards all this stuff, but nothing was really speaking to me. Like I just didn't really belong in the store. And but before I left the store, I saw like a little ID case. And it was like a blue leather ID case. And I thought, oh, I'll buy this. So I go to get in line at the cashier, and ahead of me in line is a mother and her like high school age daughter. And they were talking about, with the cashier, about her like learning German or something like in school. And And like in the store, there were all of these mannequins that were doing like the Heil Hitler salute. Like it was just like a little Nazi energy in there. And I remember being kind of alarmed by all of this. And I look behind me and there's two black women, a mother and a daughter, and they are very uncomfortable and they decide to leave. And I look down at my ID and like I see my ID inside of it, and I'm like, no, I can't have this ID. And I like throw it across the room and I leave following these black women, and I leave the store. And then I went down to the parking structure and I was going to pay for parking in my dream. I don't know if King of Prussia Mall you pay for parking there, but in LA you do, so I'm just so used to paying for parking. And I'm at the parking machine and I put my ticket in and I go to put my money in, but before I can do that, the machine starts spewing money at me, like just wads and wads and wads of like cash. And I'm like, whoa. And I turn around and there's like a father and a son. They're like looking at me and they're like, how did you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. And I like took all this money, like all this cash in my arms, and I like ran to go to my car and I like drove away. And when I was telling Katie this dream, I was like, I feel like this is a dream about like me rejecting like the like white supremacy identity, and in doing so, like energetically and consciously and all this stuff, like I will be rewarded with money. And so she was like, that sounds like a great improvement. And so I was having all these different types of dreams of this nature throughout this time. Also around this time, I saw this IG story that Marissa Tancherone, my old boss, had posted that belonged to her brother-in-law, Zach Whedon. And you guys can go watch it. It's about all these cats that he found buried in his new front yard, basically, when he was looking to like change the landscaping. And it's a very insane story. There were many cats buried there. And when I saw this, I was so shocked and I couldn't help myself. I commented on it on Marissa's post about it, and I was like, listen, you guys probably need to do something with that land, because spiritually that needs to have some cleansing there happening. And so Marissa and I actually exchanged a couple of DMs about this, and they ended up going to House of Intuition and buying like quartz crystals or whatever, like put in the corners of the yard or whatever. And a few days after this, my old roommate texts me and says that her dad found a mom cat and a litter of kittens that were just born in his backyard. And he moved them into his garage to like have a shelter and to kind of stay there temporarily while he found homes for them. And she asked me if I would be interested in adopting any of the cats, any of the kittens. And eventually she later sent me photos and stuff. And I was like, they're so cute, but like I was really hesitant because everything in my life felt so uncertain, and I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to take care of them. But like also in the back of my mind, I was like, what are the odds that like there are all those cats buried in Zach Whedon's front yard, and then like right after this, like my old roommate texts me about these newborn kittens that she wants me to adopt. And it kind of, in the back of my mind, I was like, I feel like the universe, first of all, I was like, I feel like these are reincarnated cats and the universe wants me to have them. Like for some reason I had this thought, but I was like, I don't know. I feel very uncertain about my life and I'm not sure. So I just told her I would think about it. Meanwhile, as late April, early May rolled around, I began getting many death omens. And I realized that the upcoming new moon was going to be in Bharani Nakshatra, which is ruled by Yama, who is the god of death. And so I texted my astrologer and I was like, hey, do you have any information on Yama? And he was like, yeah, I actually have a whole book on Yama, and if you want, you can come over and borrow it. And I was like, sweet. So I went over there to borrow this book on Yama, the god of death, and I asked him, hey, whatever happened to you at the hospital? And he confessed to me that he had been psychically attacked and that it nearly killed him, and that his guru saved his life. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like I was shocked, and like I had sensed a kind of darkness when I did Reiki on him, but I really didn't have at that point like the experience to know what it was basically. And so I was really shocked by this, and I was like, hey, so what did he do with it? Like, did he transmute it to light or return to sender? And my astrologer was like, return to sender. But I think they'll live. And I was like, what? And I was like, dude, how do you even know anyone who can do this to you? Like, that seems like very suspect right now. And he was basically like, yeah, I am currently reevaluating the people in my circle. And I'm like, like, I was like, dude, like, shouldn't you have done this like after the ayahuasca shaman who was your best friend turned evil? But I didn't really press the matter. And so I just thanked him for the book and I left. Shortly after this, I finally started working on my script stuff again, and I started making good progress again. And I was like, sweet, if I can just get this script out soon, maybe I can score a win and get out of this unemployment situation, because my finances are about to become incredibly fucked beyond belief. About a week or two into May, I was plugging away on my script when, out of the blue, I got a text from Joss. And I was so excited to hear from him, and I quickly opened it up. But when I read it, my heart sank. He was basically gushing to me about this new girl that he was seeing, some Canadian who he couldn't stop raving about for like an entire paragraph. And I was so taken aback. I was devastated, and I just burst into tears. I didn't understand. I was like, we had these great dates. Like, I thought things were going well, and then he went silent, and I thought it was because he was busy, but really it was because he had found someone else, and I couldn't believe it. I didn't respond to his text for like a week because I was so confused and depressed. And finally, when I did respond, he like seemed to have no idea that I was wanting to continue dating him, and like he chalked the whole thing up to some kind of like misunderstanding. And I just felt so bad. But at the same time, he didn't make it seem like this information on my end like would change anything. Like it was just too late for me, and he had already made his choice. In the aftermath of this bullshit, I decided, fuck it, I'm getting 2 cats. So my old roommate and I drove up to Fresno together, and we went to go see them. And in the pictures she sent me beforehand, I had my eye on 2 of them. One was a white fluffy one, like a rag doll, and the other was a spotted tabby and looked like the mom. And when I went inside the garage, all the kittens got up from their little nest and ran away instantly, except for one, the white fluffy one. And we locked eyes and we stared into each other's eyes for a few moments, and I went to look back at my roommate and I was like, are you seeing this? Like, she's one of the ones I wanted. And she was like, oh my gosh, like she chose you. And I was like, oh my gosh. We then went out to get Indian food. And when we came back, her dad went to go try and capture some of the kittens to play with us in the bathroom. And after a long while, he came back with the only one he could grab. And it was the tabby. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the other one that I wanted. And they went to try and grab more, but they could only manage to get one other one. And it was the white fluffy one again. And I was like, you guys don't understand. I don't need any more cats. Like, these are the 2 that I came here for. And they were so cute. I almost burst into tears. I was so happy. I had never had cats before. And I've been so lonely in my apartment, just me, for so long. And I thought, at the very least, I get to have like these 2 cats with me as my companions from now on. Upon getting back from Fresno with my 2 new kittens, who I named Artemis and Athena, I heard from Joss again, and we were chatting a little bit about some stuff, and because we had sort of smoothed things out between us as friends, even though I was still like low-key really upset. And I mentioned something about like trauma and how psychic ability can be affected by it or something. I forget exactly what it was. But he was like, wait, that's exactly the information that I've been wondering about. And in the back of my mind, I was like, yes, you could have hired me to write on your show knowing all about this stuff, but whatever. But in that moment, he offered me some money to do research for him, like $2,000 or whatever. And I agreed to do this because, well, for one thing, it'd be easy because like I know all about psychic ability and whatever stuff. And I also really needed the money, quite frankly. At that point, I was like really on the brink. And but on top of all of this, I was like, well, honestly, the only way to really know how psychic ability works is to understand the context in which you're operating, which is, of course, the holographic universe. And so I was like, well, wait a minute. This is actually a great opportunity for me to educate him on how we live in a hologram. So I was like finding a silver lining to all of this, and began to get a little hopeful that at least maybe I could like break through some of the resistance towards some of this stuff. But before I had a chance to even begin compiling this document for Joss about psychic ability, I had to leave to go to Texas because I had agreed to see family for a little while for my grandfather's birthday. And my grandmother was in failing health, and I suspected that it might be the last time that I see her alive. So I went to Houston, and The entire trip was an incredibly heightened karmic clearing experience for me. My Kundalini was pretty on fire almost the entire time I was there, and I knew instantly that it was all connected to the ancestral karmas that I had been clearing since like the beginning of the year and even a little bit into the fall of the previous year. And one night I got really sick after dinner out, and I thought maybe it was because of the food, but as I was dry heaving into the toilet, I realized that it was actually energetic. And at that moment, I got another pretty big download, and it was for the next project that I am meant to work on after the script. And I was really surprised. I was like, I haven't even finished my script yet, and now you're telling me what I'm supposed to do after that? Like, it felt like I felt like very out of left field for me. But at the same time, I recognized that it was due to some of the ancestral stuff that I've been clearing, and it was kind of a boon for me. So I was very appreciative that I got this download. The next day, I went to brunch at my grandparents' house, and while I was there, some of my other family was there, like my dad and some other people. And my aunt was there, and she brought her friend. And he is this black man. This friend of my aunt's says to me that he was looking forward to meeting me because he's heard all about me and how I'm into spiritual topics. And I was like, oh, like, yeah, I'm in spiritual topics. And anyway, I started talking to this guy, and I very quickly realized that he is completely enlightened. He experiences no thought. And I was, to say I was in shock that I met an enlightened man in my grandparents' house, like, is an understatement. Like, I honestly was blown away by this man's knowledge. And I received a long transmission from him energetically as we spoke. And we were just sitting at the kids' table, like me and him, and then like everybody else, like my aunt, I'm pretty sure is aware of this, but everybody else seemed pretty clueless that he was enlightened. And I was just sitting there like, you guys, like, you don't get what's happening right now. I couldn't believe that I had been found there, like in my grandparents' house, of all places. And it was a very humbling experience for me, honestly. And I have nothing but the deepest respect for this person who I encountered, who I've had the blessing to have spent time with. Upon my return from this incredibly heightened trip to Houston, I rapidly wrote up a draft of the research for Joss, and I sent it to him on June like 19th or something like that, or 20th or something. And I didn't hear from him for a few days, but I did text him on his birthday to say happy birthday to him, and I thought maybe he'd bring it up, but he didn't. And he was distant and aloof. And I didn't text him again. And he didn't text me again. It was at this point that I realized that he didn't care about the research. He was just looking for a way to pay me off to offset his guilt about fucking up with me again. And then he ghosted me. And by this point, at the end of June, I was pretty much at an all-time low. I was so hurt and disgusted by how poorly Joss had treated me yet again. And this time, I felt like I had no one but myself to blame. On top of all of this, I was financially fucked. My credit cards were maxed out. I had no job, no money, no prospects. I was basically living off of a small allowance from my dad that was not enough to cover my basic living expenses because he thought I was not pulling my weight and that I needed to, pull myself up by my own bootstraps or whatever. And this was pretty maddening to me, given everything I was going through. But of course, I had no way to explain the levels of ancestral karmas that I was clearing on behalf of our entire lineage. So it just looked on the surface like I was being lazy. But the reality is I was actually working incredibly hard. And it was frustrating to feel like I wasn't doing enough, to be made to feel like that at the time. Again, hard to blame him on a certain level, and I don't mean to seem ungrateful for, what I was given, but I was still in a lot of pain. And meanwhile, I was basically subsisting on rice and peanut butter, and I basically had enough money to cover one more month of rent, July. And I was at such a loss to know what to do. And by the end of June, I came to the dark realization that, barring some sort of miracle, this was the end of the road for me here in Hollywood.